We are starting. Don't look at the camera.
Look at the camera?
No, look at me.
Look at you, okay.
Look at me. Okay, today is October 16th, 2018. We are in Los Angeles, California, in the neighborhood of
Sherman Oaks.
Sherman Oaks in the valley, right? We're in the valley.
Right.
And we are at the home of Tom Tugend. How do you pronounce your last name?
Tugend, yeah, hard G.
Tugend. Tom, oh God. Sorry, turn off my phone. Tom, excuse me about that. Sorry about that. Please tell me where and when you were born.
I was born in Berlin, Germany, in June 30th, 1925.
June 30th, 1925, in Berlin. Wow.
Long time ago. I remember seeing my buddies Hitler and Mussolini driving down the street below our balcony.
Where in Berlin did you guys live?
This was called the Charlottenburg in the west side, and it was right down the way from what was then renamed Adolf Hitler Platz. And it was one of the streets where when they had, like, it wasn't quite the equivalent of Broadway, but
huge boulevard, no?
It was a large boulevard, and when they had, parades or guests and so on, they walked down, and so we had a front row seat.
Really? Now, tell me about the house that you grew up in.
House at that time.
Like about your more like your parents.
Yeah, my father was a very prominent pediatrician.
Hold on a sec. Excuse me?
I'm sorry about it.
It's okay. Thank you. If you're almost done, that's fine.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Don't look at the camera.
Oh yeah, don't look at the camera.
At
look at you. Extremely very prominent pediatrician, who of course was immediately dismissed from all positions when a month within Hitler came to power in March 19.
We'll get to that. I want to know about your parents. I want to know who they are and.
Okay. My father was they at that time, only billionaires had individual houses, but this was a large apartment on the west end of.
Do you remember the name of the street that you grew up on?
Yeah, Reichstraße, Reich like the Third Reich or the First Reich, Reichstraße number 104.
Tell me about your father. His name.
His name was Dr. Gustav Tugendreich.
And where was he from? Where was he from?
He too. I mean, our family went back for centuries in Germany, and so they, like many German Jews, felt very much culturally and otherwise identified with.
Was your father in the First World War?
Yes, he was in 4 years in the German army as an army doctor.
Wow.
He was already a doctor at the time.
Did he ever tell you about his experiences in the First World War?
Not really, and I'm always still sorry that I didn't ask him. But at that time, you're a young kid.
Of course.
What, some civil war, revolutionary war? Who cares?
And tell me about your mother.
My mother was also from quite well-to-do German Jewish family, also going back many generations.
Her name?
Irene. Her maiden name was Funtime. Her mother name was Irene.
Now, Irene is a housewife, or does she work, or is she?
She was actually at that time, the middle upper class didn't work, but she was a volunteer, and later on actually became president of the Women's International Zionist Organization in Germany.
That was the next question that I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
As far as Judaism, and as far as tradition and Zionism, what kind of house would you describe your home?
Again, not fairly typically of the class and the time, completely non-religious. My first recollection of any religious ceremony is you had a governess and you had a maid, and at Christmas time, all the master and the lady of the house and the servants all sat around the Christmas tree and sang Holy Night, Silent Night, including the children.
In your house?
Yeah, in your house.
In your house?
In my house. In my house. So there was absolutely no sense of religion.
At all?
Yeah. I mean, the definition at the time was we were Germans of Mosaic belief.
What does that mean?
Germans of Jewish, but we didn't even say quite Jewish. You said Jewish, like Moses. We're Germans first, but our belief, Lutheran, Catholic, we were Mosaic, like Moses. Mm-hmm.
Did you have a bar mitzvah?
I had a bar mitzvah because at that time, I don't know how much history you want, but on March 1933, when Hitler came to power and the anti-Semitic thing, suddenly all the German Jews who said, I'm German first and Jewish someplace else, suddenly realized to the Germans they were Jews. They were not Germans, they were Jews. And at that point, everybody, we started, I had a bar mitzvah in 1938, the year before we came to the United States.
So your house is completely German?
Your
home?
At home was completely, until 1933.
Okay. So I want to talk about before 1933. So your father is he's a physician?
He's a pediatrician.
A pediatrician?
Yeah.
He's got his own office?
Pardon me?
He has his own office?
He had, first of all, he has his own office, but he also later on, then as was common, had an office in his home.
In his home?
Yeah. If I just, oddly enough, just now a chap from Germany is visiting us, who's also a doctor, who's writing a biography of my father, and who came over here for a week to talk to me and others, and
Wow.
Yeah, so it's interesting, everything coming together.
Why is he doing a biography about your father?
Because he was a pioneer in what is called infant care, and especially the interface between your social and economic status and the health of your kids. The better off you are, and the healthier you are, the healthier the life for the kids. And if you live in the slums and don't have enough to eat, your health is likely to be less good. But to prove that, and so on, and this was one of the areas that the interface between the status and the economy of a family and the health of a family.
Did he do this research in Berlin or when he came to the States?
No, in Berlin. I mean, he was
wow.
Quite a bit older than we are.
So that's definitely worth mentioning, and even for our records. Again, your father's full name?
Gustav, Gustav, and then Tugend Reich, Tugend Reich. Tugend Reich. Reich, yeah. Which means, translated, rich in virtue, which was very difficult when I had, that was my birth name.
Sure.
When you were introduced to a girl and you said, we'd like you to meet rich in virtue, and they immediately lost interest, of course.
Now, do you have any siblings growing up?
I had a sister, she died. Mm-hmm.
Was she older or younger?
She was 2 years older.
She was 2 years older than, and her name?
Brigitte.
Brigitte. So, up until 1933, quite a normal childhood.
Normal childhood of a nice upper middle class family.
Mm-hmm. Jewish but totally assimilated.
Thoroughly assimilated.
Father, veteran of the First World War.
Correct.
In the Kaiser's army.
Right.
Was he in the infantry? Was he?
No, he was a doctor even at that time, as a frontline doctor.
A frontline doctor.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm sure he saw some crazy stuff there. Do you know what front he was on, or?
I'm sorry?
Do you know what front
Yeah, it was on the Western Front.
On the Western Front.
Yeah.
So he was in the trenches.
I don't know whether it was in the trench. We never talked. But you know, it would be the equivalent as the fairly the front line.
MASH.
Yeah, right. That's sort of thing. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Robert Altman's
Not quite
movie
as sexy, but yeah.
Exactly, not as sexy as MASH. Wow, okay, so he's on the Western Front. Okay. In 1933, Adolf Hitler comes to power. What happens to you guys?
The first thing that my father immediately, who had been a head of a major section of the Berlin hospital, was dismissed from his post. The second one, that they put a sign up on the front of his office saying that he was only allowed to treat non-Aryans, that he was no longer allowed to have any German patients, Aryan patients, only non-Aryan patients, which immediately, that was true then of all doctors, which in effect cut off his.
How does it affect you as a child? You're 8 years old. What do you remember?
Really very little. I mean, I remember, but I mean, it didn't affect me. And it's difficult when somebody when we talk to somebody like you or your generation or your background, because you think when you say Hitler, Jews, you think in terms of the Holocaust. Right. At that point, nobody could even imagine. So, as was common at the time, you sent your kids, again in the class, to a private school. We went to Montessori, which at that time was an advanced educational school. Even if I had been not Jewish, we wouldn't have gone to a public school because that was for the peasants. So we went to the private school, and later on to a boarding school in suburban Berlin. I lived in the house that used to belong to Albert Einstein. And and the main focus of my life was soccer at the time. Both the team I played on, and from school team, and the other one, the German and even the English teams and so on. If you can imagine the greatest baseball nut as a kid, but mine would be soccer.
But we're talking about the age of how old?
Well, starting at, as you say, I was 8.
8.
And you start playing, and then until I left, I was close to 14. I was few months after my bar mitzvah. And, but if you got together, we talked about, you didn't talk about politics or so on. You said, hey, how did
Byron München do? How did this do?
How did this do?
What was your team?
Well, it was odd. There was it wouldn't mean anything to you. One was called Schalke 04, which was a Schalke 04, which was a team. There was a Berlin team. So on different levels, we rooted for certain German teams. But I spent a good part of my time, and I still have collecting autographs of soccer players. Yeah.
Now, before 33, you go to public school?
No, you never went to public school because
it was not a class.
Yeah, it's the same class distinctions you had and probably still have in England. That like you sent Churchill goes to Sandhurst or something. He wouldn't go to for the same school as the peasants.
So where do you go to school after Hitler comes to power?
The first one was there was already the Montessori school, which was a sort of an advanced educational one. Then I went for many years to the boarding school called Kaput, and then subsequently in the last couple of years to a Jewish school called Theodor Herzl School.
In Berlin?
In Berlin, yeah.
Now, in 1935, the Nazis published the Nuremberg Laws. And that's...
Bless you.
Excuse me. And that intensifies the whole situation. You're 10 years old.
Yeah.
You're 10 years old when these laws come in effect.
Yeah.
They take away your citizenship. you can't go to school, you can't sit on benches, you can't marry, you can't, it's like the whole law of, even if you have one grandparent who is Jewish, that's it. Now you're 10, and do you remember when these were published? Do you remember like your parents talking about it? No.
No, I mean, first of all, as I say, much of the time I wasn't at home.
Right.
Secondly, you didn't, at that time purposely you didn't, and you lived in a certain cocoon of your own. I was now in a Jewish environment. The school was Jewish. The students were Jewish. The teachers were. Socially,
you're ostracized. Basically,
well, there was no chance to be ostracized because I had no contact. I had no interface with the German kids.
Right.
I mean, we may have had a couple of playmates at the time, and at some point, their parents told them not to play with us and so on. But it didn't matter because my whole environment at that time really was separated by the fact Jewish and Aryan, but perhaps even more. And you can't. It's hard for an American to realize that you almost have to grow up in Britain to understand it. What the distinction? These were two different countries. The lower class and the
middle class. What year did you guys actually immigrate to the States?
We came to here in May 1939.
May 1939. So you guys actually lived through Kristallnacht.
We lived through Kristallnacht. My father left in 1937.
What happened that he left?
Okay. At this rate, we're going to be here 24 hours, Excuse me. Thelma. Just get
some water?
Yeah. Some cold water.
Cold water?
Yeah.
Can we have some cold water, please? I'll take it to him. Getting you some water, hold on. I'm getting you some water.
Ta-da.
Thank you, my dear. Thank you. There you go, Tom.
We're lucky. You better keep talking before they start hammering again. This is in short is a deal, and tell me if we get too far off because I have a long life.
I want to know when you're farther left.
Okay, I'll tell you what. In 1919, after Germany lost World War I, the Quakers, British Quakers, and the French Quakers and American Quakers came to Germany to help feed the hungry children. My father was designated by the German government to be the liaison with the American British Quakers in this relief. 20 years later, 15 years later, things start getting tough. Initially, my father had an international reputation. He got all kinds of offers, but like most German Jews said, this is temporary, the aberration, the Germans would never do this. And so there's an American law that if you taught for 1 year at a foreign university, non-American university, and had a job lined up for 1 year at an American university, you jumped ahead of the quota you didn't have to, the immigrant line. So the British Quakers, he got in touch with them, arranged for him to have a lectureship at the University of London 1 year before coming to the United States. He left in 37 to 38. The American Quakers arranged for him to have a lectureship in public health at Bryn Mawr University outside Philadelphia. which was the other part of it that he had in the rabbi. So he went by himself. We stayed behind, my mother, my sister, and myself. So he went ahead, and actually we could have gone to America at any time during that time. He was here, we had a visa, but nobody felt there was any hurry. You know, what's the rush? Even after Munich, 38, my father wrote, you know, forget about taking furniture or money or anything, pack up and come. And we all said, well, you know, what's he worrying about? Nothing, you know, what's the rush? So anyhow, so we left very leisurely. We packed all our furniture. We took a very nice second class or first class to German boat and arrived in May. And I remember
Was Kristallnacht the tipping point, though?
Kristallnacht, I remember that we lived above a stationery store owned by Jewish men, and we turned out the light and so on, and we could hear them, you know, smashing the windows, and the owner running through our apartment, trying to get away from him. But, you know, I remember it, but then afterwards, you know, the resilience of kids, and then to some extent, I say, I don't know how much of a sports nut you were, but if you were, you know, maybe like some kids in Brooklyn whose whole life revolved around the Brooklyn Dodgers, for all I know, that's something similar. And that's, in retrospect, and looking at everything else that happened in history, that even after Munich, 38, we would say,
it's okay.
Yeah, you know.
But not after Kristallnacht.
Even after Kristallnacht.
So
that this was a temporary thing.
So what made you guys go in May?
Well, then finally you could realize, even after, it was primarily, I think my mother, in most of these cases, was the woman of the house who said, you got to push. And as I say, we're in a lucky position, my father's position, that he had somewhere to go. He had seen other people couldn't, at that time already.
There's the story of the St. Louis.
Yeah, right. The same era.
You guys were very fortunate.
It's the same era.
Very fortunate.
Everything at that time, or in life in general, depends on chance.
What do you guys leave with?
I'm sorry?
What do you guys leave with?
We left. We couldn't take money, but we could, for instance, they allowed our entire furniture. We took in a lift over, and what we had on the back. But even at that point, the Germans were. This was a point. We just wanted Jews to go away before we just want to kill all the Jews. And so they okay. You can whatever money you have. As long as it's to your immigration, you can use your money to buy your steamship ticket. You use your money to get your furniture out, and that's it. And my was very modestly paid, but my father had a lectureship here and there, and so I mean compared to 6 million others, we're just few chance.
Where do you arrive in the United States? Philadelphia?
We arrived right in Bryn Mawr, which is a suburb, mainline suburb of Philadelphia.
14 years old, right?
I was on.
14.
I came on. I arrived in the middle of May, and June 30th I became 14.
So you're in a new country, and right after you arrive, World War II breaks out.
Well, let me just precede this. I was sent to also somebody arranged a Jewish camp to acclimatize to American way in the summer of 1939, and the kids here who had the newsreel here and the war. I said, look, I just come from Germany, and I made a little hit by imitating Hitler and everything. I can absolutely assure you there's never going to be a war because it's the old Stockholm syndrome. The German press said it. Hitler is too smart. He's going to, outsmart everybody in the West. There's not going to be any war. Hitler will get what he wants. So we believe that. So I remember so I said, okay, you can trust me. I'm come from there. No war. On September 1st, 1939, most of the kids came from welfare homes, so their parents picked them up in their cars. I came in the laundry truck for the camp, it was outside Philadelphia, and I was standing, and I see at the corner you have newspaper boys, war, 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 and I said, must be some mistake, there can't be any war. And so war, World War I, World War II, sorry. And so war broke out, and we were, oddly enough, well, no, I mean, at this point, America wasn't involved. So anyhow.
America doesn't get involved for another 2 years.
Yeah, so anyhow, that's...
Do you go to public school in
Yes.
Philadelphia?
Yeah,
You gotta
and
learn English? It's a tough
I didn't-
age.
I
It's a
didn't-
tough age.
huh?
It's a tough age to immigrate, 13.
They what?
It's a tough age to immigrate.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, this was also a waspish, very waspish neighborhood. I know mainline Philadelphia, the Philadelphia story. I don't know if that.
Sure.
Anyhow, very, and at the time, as all of America, very anti-Semitic, and so we went to a Lower Merion Junior High. We're well ahead in math and so on, but oddly enough, we hadn't taken American history in Germany. So since I didn't qualify, so I set back one year and started 8th grade. Our name was Tugend. We didn't realize that the Americans were no way they were going to be able to pronounce it. At that time, there was Roosevelt had one of his new dealers was a guy named Guy Tugwell. So on the way to school, we talked about what should be our name. So it could be either Tugwell or Tugend. But so we cut off the Reich. My parents kept it, but and then when
Your grandparents came with you too?
Huh?
Your grandparents?
No.
Your
Parents.
Yeah.
Parents kept Tugend Reich. I didn't formally change it until I got into the American Army, and then it formally changed to Tugend.
So World War II is on. You're in 8th grade. You're in 9th grade. By December 1941, when America enters the war, I'm sure you remember that day, Pearl Harbor.
I remember listening to on the radio. They had the Metropolitan Opera on Sunday afternoon, and we interrupt this broadcast.
And you
How old are you?
I'm 43.
So you're practically newborn, okay.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Are you dealing with any anti-Semitism in the States?
Very much so. It's hard for, I think, your generation. I don't know, where did you grow up?
Detroit.
Huh?
Detroit.
So I don't know whether or not. But this was a pervasive anti-Semitism. I'll tell you a quick anecdote. My first year or second year in an American school, we had an English class, and I was the only foreigner, and they had Shakespeare. So what does it, what 8th grade, what play do you give Shakespeare? The Merchant of Venice. And so we had a conversation, and there was only guy I was a little friendlier with. So afterwards they had a little discussion. And this friend of mine got up and said, isn't that typical of the Jews? They want a pound of flesh. And the teacher wanted to be very, said, well, look, they're good Jews, they're bad Jews, they're good Christian, they're bad Christian. And my friend thought for me and said, yeah, you're right, but when it comes down to it, wouldn't you rather buy something from an American than a Jew? Well, I thought I was going to be an American. And now this guy's telling me I can never really be an American. That there was a clear distinction. You were American or you were a Jew, and it was not nobody threw stones and so on, but
the attitude.
Yeah, I mean, clear, understood, and I'll just jump forward. When I was in the Army and in basic training in World War II, and I was in the barracks mostly with Southern boys.
Sure. Where'd you do your basic training?
In Camp Landing, Florida. And
Good old boys.
Huh?
With the good old boys.
yeah. And
Is that Army, infantry?
Army, U.S. Army, yeah.
What
Infantry.
infantry?
Yeah, at that time when we got in, they needed.
What year was it when you went in?
I joined in before I finished high school. I as soon as I could, March '44,
Okay.
and so we started talking with one of the good Southern boy about religion, which we really didn't. And what church do you belong to? He asked me. He says, "I'm Jewish." He said, "No, you're not." Well, he said, "What do you mean?" No, you're not. I mean, a Jew has horns on his forehead, and he's dealing with money, and so all the stereotype. And I didn't have a hook nose, and I didn't, lend money at usury. So it took a while. Then finally, he was convinced. And he looked me in the eye and put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "Tom, you are a white Jew." That was the highest compliment. You're a white Jew. So, but all throughout the army, I mean, that it was, even at that time, was better to be a German than a Jew. I mean, it was, you didn't have pogroms and so on, but the sheer distinction.
Listen, my father was in the Air Force in the 60s.
60s, yeah.
60s, here in the States. And he dealt with a lot of anti-Semitism. And he was a captain.
I believe it.
He was a captain. And he dealt with the colonel who just hated Jews.
What is
The Air
it?
Force. He was a doctor.
He's a doctor? What's your last name?
Faudem.
Huh?
Faudem.
Oh, so you couldn't tell from
It wasn't like Goldstein or Shapiro. It was Faudem. Faudem's not a Jewish name.
Hmm. Yeah,
It's not,
yeah.
But he
Well, so you know your father.
Yeah, so he, my father also talked a lot about how in the military in the United States, he was in the service between 64, 65, 66 during Vietnam, but he was stationed in Columbus, Ohio.
Was he in the regular army or?
He was in the Air Force.
Air Force, but I mean, what's it?
He was a dentist.
Uh-huh.
So he was a doctor. So when he immediately went in, he became a captain.
Yeah.
Which they call an instant officer.
Yeah.
But let's get back to you.
Yeah.
So, March 1944, you join the army. You're in the infantry. What battalion are you in? What are you?
This was a. It was for training, and then I was assigned to the Fort Dix 63rd
Fort
Infantry.
Dix is New Jersey, right?
Huh?
Fort Dix is New Jersey.
New Jersey, yeah. 63rd Infantry Division, and as a. And then assigned to the 254th Infantry Regiment, which went over in the fall of D-Day. I was still in training. In September, I believe, we landed in France from the south, Marseille, and we saw action in primarily in the Alsace-Lorraine border between France and Germany. We were attached, my regiment, to the 1st French Army, and 70 years later, a few months ago, I was inducted in the French Legion of Honor as a knight, a chevalier. So
wow, we'll take a picture of that.
So just a few months ago, very handsome medal, and the French consul kissed me on both cheeks, and then toward the end, and if we get into World War II, we'll never end this interview. But anyhow, I did nothing terribly heroic. But
what was your job?
Initially, it was a heavy weapons company, which means a 50 millimeter machine gun and 80 millimeter mortar, and primarily in something called the Colmar pocket, Colmar, in which a German defeated and so on. Then finally, when the war came to an end, they discovered I talked German. And that was very useful. So first I was an interpreter. But then I was transferred to the Counterintelligence Corps, and our job was to find. And now suddenly, this little Jew boy and all the Germans were scraping and bowing and so on.
To you?
Yeah, and I was 19 years old. And to anybody, you know, anybody who was on top, and the Americans were on top. So they...
So are you interrogating German soldiers?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. The myth at the time that the Germans would leave behind one saboteur in each village to fight the American occupation, the underground. And our job was to find that person, root him out and so on. And every town, and so I went by myself with a Jeep from village to village, 19 years old, and I asked a guy, a Nazi, and to talk to, let's say, the Germans, said, never. I always, in my heart, of course, I couldn't do anything, but in my heart, I was always against Hitler. But my brother and my cousin, my uncle, and so on, they were all Nazis, and I'll show you where they live. And so everybody, eager, you know, oh, yeah, all Nazis. Everybody was a Nazi except me. So for this one, every village. Finally, I went to a village, and that guy said, look, there's an 80-year-old blind poet living there, and he was a Nazi all the way. So I went over to his house. I said, your neighbors say you were. He said, absolutely, I love the Führer. I still love the Führer. I believe in him. I thought he was the greatest German, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, if he was a normal guy, I would take him in, but 80-year-old blind poet. But I went to McBurney's office and I said, look, I think I deserve a medal. I said, how come? He said, I found the only Nazi in all of Germany. Nobody else was ever a Nazi.
Never.
Yeah. So then...
Are you also exposed at this time to Holocaust survivors?
No, nobody knew about it. I mean, even we knew we had to trade. For instance, I could see prisoners, but they were primarily political prisoners. It was just beginning to seep out, but really a consciousness of the Holocaust in general was not until about 20 years after the war. It took, you know, when they...
I know, but you didn't meet people in Germany at that time in DP camps who were Auschwitz survivors, Bergen-Belsen survivers. You didn't have any interaction with them?
No, not personally. I came across... would you mind putting that on there? Sure. It's getting cold. There was a beginning, there was some idea, but again, there was sort of a universal denial, certainly in Germany itself, and even, for instance, many of the refugees who came to Palestine before the State of Israel didn't really want to talk about it. If the other people said, well, I thought the Nazis killed the Jews, so if you're a woman, you must have slept with them. So, and it was sort of considered shameful, the whole thing. It wasn't until about 20 years later, a film like Holocaust Meryl Streep, the testimonies and so on.
So the war is over. You're in Germany for how long after the war?
In Germany, I'm over, but I'm transferred because I haven't enough points to them. And they will say they will send you back to the States. You get a month at home, and then you're going to invade Japan. And we'll have about 1 million casualties, but you know somebody's got to do the job. And I had no particular ambition to die on Japanese beaches, and I was a private first class at the time. I ended up as a sergeant. And so with a great chutzpah and I went to the Pentagon, and I asked for the general in charge of manpower, and he was a very fatherly person. He said, "What? I envy you. You had a chance to fight overseas. I had to stay in Washington." So he said, I think I can be more usefulness in the occupation of Germany and by my knowledge than dying as a private in Japan. And he said, that makes sense. I'll look into it. And I said, well, that's the end of it. I was sent to Fort Hood, Texas, and Fort Sam Houston, Texas, and taught how to type. That was the beginning of my journalistic career. And and to type up papers of people being discharged. I figured that's going to be the end of my Army career.
Better than going to Japan.
Yeah, better than Japan. That was then. And then one day, the sergeant comes in. I'm now at Fort Sam Houston, and he says, "We have orders for you to leave tomorrow for New York." I said, "What's about?" He said, "Top secret. I can't tell you." They said, "Okay." Give me a place in Governor's Island, and say tomorrow report to this office in Wall Street. I go off Wall Street. Said reporting. Said what's it about? Said we don't know. Top secret. And on and on and on. And so I spent about and said just every week, every day morning come in. We have nothing to do. We'll give you tickets for the best Broadway shows for the evening. And if you have any luck with the girls, good luck. And so this went on. And then one day, anyhow, to make a very long story short, they had a 1-week re-education program for German prisoners of war who were supposedly non-Nazis and who were going to be sort of the low civil servants or of a German government under the occupation. Our job was, again, and a bunch of the POWs, people who had been with Rommel and so on, were ardent Nazis and really ran the POW camp, the American camp, and killed anybody who showed signs of being too friendly American. But they now maintained they had been anti-Nazis, wanted to get in on this. So anyhow, our job was to, A, differentiate between who were really the fanatical Nazis and one who were apolitical, and secondly, who would be fit to be re-educated. They had a 6-day course to make Democrats out of them, called the 6-day bicycle race, and that was our job. And after 6 days, they were certified as Democrats and sent back to Germany to work as.
How long did you do this for?
Pardon me?
How long did you do this for?
This wasn't too long. I was discharged in March of '46. And the war ended in September of '45. So a total of about 6 months, the whole thing.
And that's when you get discharged after?
I get discharged.
Now, after you get discharged, what do you do?
GI Bill, UCLA, Berkeley.
What do you want to go study? Journalism?
Yeah, journalism, and then first UCLA. That's where, school paper, so Berkeley, and 48. Now we come up.
Now we're coming to.
Now
we're getting started.
Yeah.
That was just a warm-up.
Now you're going to run out of film about this time.
Fine. So you're studying in UCLA.
I started, for my first semester.
And do you belong to the Hillel House, or are you like?
No, not really. Again, I really at that time you. Had so much to catch up on, and I stayed at home. And again, I wasn't really involved in any particular Jewish.
How does Tom get involved with Mahal? How does it start?
I thought you'd never ask. It's an interesting combination. The mythology is. Here were a bunch of idealistic youngsters, and we were going to. And I'm my idealist, and it's like any life decision, you probably from your own experience too. It's never made up of one thing. They're component. Who you marry, who what and so on. In this case, partially I was still sort of restless from World War II, never quite settled down, and secondly. I, had grown up first in Germany, but also in America. In the sense, the Jews, they're smart, they're good businessmen, but they don't fight. They're draft dodgers. They're cowards. And I remember walking down Market Street. I was in Berkeley in 48, by beginning of 48. And there was these newsreels, and all the Jews fight for the kind of God. Jews fighting? That's there's something stereotyping about them. And I started getting very restless. And then the American Jewish community was keeping fairly low, but Ben Hecht and the Goon people were already advertising. So gradually, it sort of got to the point, partially adventure, partially to show that Jews can fight, that they're not cowards. Partially sort of a sense of history. I knew enough that, a Jewish state.
But who approaches? Like, how does it happen that you get involved? I mean, is it?
Well, it was relatively easy on the East Coast. I was now in Berkeley after the first semester. In the spring of '48, I'm sorry, 46. Anyhow, I was already in Berkeley. I was a junior at Berkeley, living there, and there was supposedly there was something set up called land and labor on the East Coast, right? Which there was nothing like this on the West Coast and nothing in San Francisco. And as I say, while the British Jewish community, Australian, especially South African, the whole Jewish community, in general, the American Jewish community wanted to keep its head down. Double loyalty, or who are you, American, Israeli? Anyhow, so it was pretty much up to me. I just asked around, and somebody said, go to the Butchers Union in San Francisco, and the business agent, Mike Elkins, is the liaison for it. So I went over and I came in, and the guy just about died. He said, it's supposed to be, go to this telephone booth and then drop a key, and when you just walk in. And he became later he was a screenwriter, was left for. Anyhow, he said, okay, I'll arrange it for you. We'll work out something for you. But nothing happened. And then, so it came toward the end of the summer, and so I had to decide, was I going to go over or was I going to, stay in Berkeley? So I just decided to go on my own. I bought a train ticket to New York, and walked into this office, Land and Labor, and on the East Coast. I had
New York. In New York.
I had a San Francisco, but my passport. All the other ones on the East Coast says not valid for travel to Palestine or some. In San Francisco, they hadn't caught up yet. So I walked in there and I said,
Do you remember where this office was?
Oh,
was it on 14th Street?
It sounds like right. Yeah, sounds right. Yeah, it's a. And they said, do you have a passport? Yeah, I said, clear. It said, we have a ship leaving in 2 days. Are you ready to go? And I brought along, a few stuff. I said, okay. And so then in 2 days, ironically, a boat hired by the State Department for American exchange students to go to Europe, and three other guys whom we were supposed not to recognize, anyhow, were also. So we all went on the boat together, and
Marseille.
In Marseille, Camp Arenas, I believe. Some good times in Marseille and the local ladies, and
got your feet wet.
Yeah. It was very nice, and it was so partially. You've probably heard about this camp before. Sure. Partially refugee camp, we had North American Jews and so on.
North African.
Yeah, North African, right, and but also some people like myself, British, American, Canadians.
Yeah. And are you getting a little training up there?
Not really. I mean, in the other branches, Air Force, Navy, and so on, of course, they were. But
now, is there Haganah guys there that are?
Well, we had a little sort of exercises, but also they were trying to keep a fairly low profile. I mean, the French knew about it, but we didn't want to make it obvious.
Right. So what? This is 1948. This is.
Which means 1948.
Around what time?
We're now talking about probably August.
So the state has already been declared.
The state has been declared. Oh yeah, I came after the state was declared. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Right. So they asked me, where do you want to go? So I was so romantic. I said, I'd like to be in the paratroops and land behind enemy lines, and said, how is your Arabic? And I said, not very good. I said, forget it. So at that time, they didn't quite know what to do with people like myself. We had experience. So they, so it was a little bit like the Middle Ages, where the local baron, rounded up the peasants and said, if you go fight under my banner, you'll get so many bushels of wheat, or you get a piece of land. In this case, we were in a camp, and an American major came, and he was forming something had persuaded the Israelis. Everything at that time was, when you compare it to how organized things were, an anti-tank unit. So he came around, but he said, "What's your inducement?" As like the peasant would ask, "If I fight for you, how many bushels of wheat?" He said, "Well, we're going to have a democratic unit, except in combat, there's no decisions are made by majority, no saluting, no ranks," and that, as an enlisted man, sounded very good to me. And so, do you want to join up? I said, okay. And said,
who was this guy?
It was called the 4th Anti-Tank Unit, Anglo-Saxon, the 4th Anglo-Saxon Anti-Tank Unit.
But who is this major who approached you?
Oh, his was just died recently. Lester Gorn was his name, Gorn. He wrote a book about it later. And he had been a Hollywood scriptwriter, very charismatic figure. And so they had a bunch together. They had a bunch of South Africans.
This is in Marseille.
Huh?
This is in Marseille. Marseille. This is still in France.
No, this is in Israel now.
This is in Israel, so you're already jumping to Israel.
Yeah. We went from France. I went on the Pan York.
What was the name of the boat that you came
Pan York.
Excuse me?
Pan York.
Okay, and it had refugees and Mahal.
They had many refugees. Also anecdotes. They were under the delusion that the Anglo-Saxons were sane people, so they put us in charge of it was like a refugee, long story. And anyhow, so they finally, we got here, we were put in a Teledvinsky, sort of a holding place, until they figured out what to do with us.
And you joined the Anglo-Saxon.
And then this guy came and said, if you join us, and you're now Anglo-Saxons. Before you were Jews overseas, but in Israel you were Anglo-Saxons. So it was the 4th Anglo-Saxon anti-tank unit.
Wow. How many people are in the unit?
There were about, I would say, something like 50 or 60. And so he said, that's great, we had anti-tank unit. So he said, okay, I'll take you out, and picked me up in a Jeep and took me to where they were stationed in the northern Negev. And I said, where's the anti-tank guns? And I said, well, we don't have any anti-tank guns because but as soon as our infantry captures an anti-tank gun from the Arabs,
we'll have one.
They finally got us what they call a 17-pounder, which was a World War I artillery piece given by the British to the Arabs, but they had instead, I have a picture, a wooden gun. They had a mock-up of a wooden gun. Said that's it. Those are your weapons. It wasn't until later, when we were in the Fallujah pocket in the Negev, and had surrounded Arab unit, Egyptian, under command of one Colonel Nasser, that one day we got said we're going to get real guns, and the Czechs, had made the weapons for the Germans, and these were still 50 millimeter anti-tank guns, artillery guns, still wrapped in oilcloth, and said, okay, you're now in business. We unwrapped it, and on the barrel was a huge swastika. So we pointed that. Had the great ironic city of a bunch of Jew boys, now Anglo-Saxons, with a gun with a swastika on it, shooting at the Egyptians. So,
Insane, huh?
yeah. So irony over
How
irony.
was these weapons? Were they good?
Huh?
The weapons that you guys got from the Czechs? Were
I'm
they good?
Yeah, very, very, very good guns. These were for the German army. Unfortunately for the Germans, the war ended before they could use it.
Wow. So you're fighting in the Negev, in the Fallujah
We
pocket?
were in Negev and Fallujah pocket, and then went south along the Jordanian Palestinian border to Eilat.
Rash. Yeah.
At that time, and I remember at 5 o'clock in the morning, crest of a hill, and the pure, one mud hut there, we're now in Eilat, and just a sand, pristine. First thing we did, we just, we've been, for days in the dust, just took every bit of clothes, jumped in.
Must have been a great feeling.
Oh, incredible. And the British were stationed in Aqaba, and because they came over the word that these aggressive Zionists were going to try to attack Jordan, and to warn us not to try to attack the kingdom of Jordan because the British would defend them. So, at that time, they got a very fierce. You're a journalist. We were going down driving down, and we had one Piper Cub as sort of a spotter plane. That was at that point. And in the evening, we were listening to the BBC, and a very authoritative voice says, Israeli forces on a heavy air cover are heading toward that was one Piper Cub on a heavy air cover. So how much you can trust the bullshit.
How long were you guys down there for?
We stayed there till the war was over.
March 49, that was the last...
Yeah, we stayed till about April, yeah.
Yeah.
And then...
the whole time you're in this unit with the other foreigners.
I'm sorry?
The whole time that you're in Israel, in the war, you're in this unit.
Yes.
Yeah, so you're with the same guys.
We were in the unit, so we were in our own little, and that's why we didn't learn. We were in our own little bubble. But we started making, myself and two other guys wrote a sort of a unit history. We were for the other thing. And most of particularly the English, and the South Africans decided to stay. They formed sort of a building kibbutz afterwards, and stayed. Pretty much all the Americans were
Left back.
Yeah, we had one American Indian, Native American in our unit.
What's his name?
Jesse Slade.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a picture of him too.
Tell me about him, please. Because
where did you hear about him?
I heard about him from a guy named Joe in Toronto, a Machal guy.
Joe, I know whom you mean.
You know, big guy, tall.
No, I think.
And he talked to me about Jesse Slade.
Yeah, he was a great character.
Tell me about Jesse Slade.
Okay. He was already, when I joined the 4th Anti-Tank, he was already there. The story was that he had been discriminated against. He was from Texas in the American Army, but he was befriended by a Jewish lieutenant who befriended him and so on, American, and that therefore everything he said is, take with 90% bullshit, but it's a nice story. And so he decided when the war was out, he was going to help the Jews. He was a bright guy. I'm sure he was discriminated against, and he spoke English the same way. So this word came about, this and mysterious Indian,
Navajo.
yeah, Indian had joined the Israeli army, and first of all, he spoke the same way we did,
right.
But gradually he forgot his English. He started, they expected him to grunt like a, ugh, pow wow or something like this. So he readily adjusted himself, took on this role of the native. He was a very good scout. We used him as a scout, and he and the Ralph Ansbach, the guy with trying to run, were very close friends, and we sort of stuck together. But gradually, we took on more and more of a role of this strange, and there's news stories about him in Israel at that time. You remember, and all these a lot of them were based on the idea of tales of the Wild West and cowboy pictures, and here was this actual live one, and. At the number of stories, the last I heard from him, he had been arrested for cattle rustling in Jordan. He had gone over and stolen some cattle in Jordan and tried to bring him back. And then I lost track. But you'll see it. He also then dressed, had a cowboy hat and played to fill the role. He was played the role of the mysterious American Indian cowboy.
So he was in your unit?
In my unit, yeah. We were the three of us.
What kind of guy was he?
I don't know how many layers of bullshit and how many layers of reality, but just a very nice guy to get along with. He never talked too much about it, but obviously that as a Indian in Texas, he'd run across his share of discrimination, and we talked about, but he was just to us pretty much another American buddy. But
right, I was told that he was killed in Jordan by stealing cattle.
And where?
In Jordan, that he was killed.
He was killed.
1951 or 52.
Oh, you mean cattle rustling?
Yeah, something like that.
I have never heard that. I haven't heard that. I didn't. Then that was sort of the last. But I know he stayed. I mean, I'm sure there are layers of layers that he probably had gotten in some kind of trouble with the law here. I don't know. But he was a real nice, good companion and a real good buddy. Yeah, we were an odd trio. The three of us. He and Ralph later became a professor of economics and at San Francisco State, and invented a game named Anti-Monopoly, and also became a big thing. And Monopoly sued him and so on. But anyhow, that was.
What other kind of characters can you tell me about that were in your unit?
The oldest guy was a guy who had been Polish. Was in his 40s, Jewish Polish, had been a refugee, very thick accent, and every time we saw a girl, a female, but he had two phrases. One, he said, whenever we got into a discussion, he would say, "You're full of shit like a Christmas turkey." And the other one, whenever he saw a girl, he said, "Come on, boys, let's clean those rusty pipes."
And who was the commander of the unit?
No, I was a squad leader. We had no formal ranks, but
there must have been one person who was kind of in charge.
Yeah. But I mean, we had 4 different squads.
Okay.
I was in charge of one squad.
Each squad is like 20 people.
15 people or so. Yeah.
And you guys had once the Czech guns came in, you guys were well equipped.
I'm sorry.
Once the weapons from Czechoslovakia came.
Yeah, we had the gun. It was a very informal setup, but Les Corner said it once. They said, "Okay, you're the squad leader." I said, "Well." Okay. I said, you're relatively sane, so.
So was it like just a group of guys who were nuts?
Some were really nutty. I mean, the Australian kids, they had gone by slow ship. They arrived toward the end, and they were 17 or 18, really youngsters, a couple of them. And somehow they lost everything you gave them. You gave them a mess kit. Gee, I lost my mess kit. You gave them a rifle. We lost a rifle. So finally we said, when we came down to the lodge, we said, okay, they had this one-piece fatigue suit that was the uniform. and said, "That's all we give you, and anything else you come up." So one day they came out of the tent, buff naked. They said, "What happened to your fatigues?" "We lost them." So you had these real naive guys. You had this vast range. You had, as we agreed, South Africans, where the whole South African Jewish community was behind them. They organized in contrast to the American Jewish community, and really natural types. And most of the Brits and the Canadians, Americans were sort of in between. Somewhere, there's in my article, I use a quote from a novelist named Harold Livingston, who wrote a book about it, and he said, why do you go over? Why you ask, what's the motivation? He said, if you're running away from your wife, you don't want it. If you want to, if you're a British communist, if you're, if so and so, if you want to show that Jews, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to, show that Jews can fight, if you want to establish a state. Again, this mixture I mentioned before of motivation. There were guys who were just wanted to get away from their family and their wives.
Sure.
There were guys who just wanted adventure. There were guys who were idealists.
It was all
the human being is not made of one piece.
But this is definitely a different unit than the different units in Tzahal.
That's a different what?
It's a different unit
Yeah.
you're talking about. The Anglo-Saxon.
The Anglo-Saxon, where in a sense it was.
Did you guys mobilize on jeeps? You guys had jeeps?
We had a we
Half tracks, jeeps.
we had a jeep. We had a jeep, but it was negative because I never learned Hebrew. Never really learned to.
You guys were in your own world, in your own bubble.
I mean, I did. Yeah, I learned Hebrew some in school, but we never really integrated into Israel. No, we never integrated into Israeli society, except those who stayed. But of the Americans, relatively few stayed.
So the war's over in March 49.
49.
What do you do after that?
Then I didn't have any money, so I worked for a couple of months in the kibbutz.
Which kibbutz?
Beit HaShita.
Beit HaShita,
Yeah.
sure, in Emek Israel.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it was mainly, but at that time, Mapam, Mapai, so on.
Oh, that's a strong Mapai kibbutz.
Mapai.
Beit HaShita, it's one of the...
Beit HaShita.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Hardcore.
But they also had some Mapam. Then I had to... then it was if I wanted to finish at Berkeley, if I still had 1 year to go, then I had to decide. So then I decided to come back, and I was supposed to, and the Jewish agency or whatever paid for the ticket. I got as far as I was supposed to catch a boat at Liverpool, and the Brits. I don't know how they knew who I was. Anyhow, they wouldn't let me in and sent me back to France. And the French were very happy because the Brits didn't like me and the French didn't like the Brits. Anyhow, I came down on a Canadian boat and came back and took a Greyhound bus to New York. And at that time, I still remember going the Greyhound bus from Canada to New York State. And somewhere along the line, a custom agent American put his head in the bus and said, "Are there any foreigners here?" Or anything? So no foreigners here. Okay. Yeah, that's it.
That's the border.
Yeah,
the border crossing.
Yeah, compare that to now. And I went back to Berkeley. Finished up in 1950, and then was recalled by the American Army for the Korean War. And I had gotten into the, you're tired, huh?
No, I think I like, you know.
And because I was, again, a little knowledge of the dangerous thing, I figured there was going to be another war, but I figured it was going to be between Russia and the United States. I didn't want to, die as an infantryman in Siberia. So they had a reserve unit, photo interpretation in Berkeley. So I said, that'll be safe. So I went into that. But just before the semester ended in June, and I left this reserve unit. So when the Korean War broke out, they didn't call up veterans of World War II, so I would have been safe. They didn't call up the unit that I had been in. They only called up inactive reservists, and so I was one of them. And they recalled me, and the American Army was completely fucked up at that time. And there was kind of Fort Ord. And I had gotten into the World War II. I wanted to get in. I had bad eyesight, but I remembered the first couple of lines, so I passed. This time I didn't want to pass. So I went in, the doctor said, okay, read the first line. I said, I can't read the letter on top. Wrote something. He said, what are you writing down? He said 1A, fit for combat duty. I said, how do you know I'm not blind? He said, those are our orders. Anybody who walks, sounds like an Abbott and Costello movie. Anybody who walks in is fit for combat duty. So all the other guys, and there were quite a few guys from World War II who had been wounded, had never seen any service, all were sent to the Chosin Reservoir to be killed. In my case, I had just gotten my degree, bachelor's degree in journalism. And the only thing more important than killing commies was they had a army newspaper at the Presidio in San Francisco for the Letterman Army Hospital. And they said, you have a journalism degree? And first as a reporter and then as an editor. So I spent a very tough 4 year in San Francisco, right under the Golden Gate Bridge. Best year I ever had in my life, women-wise. And every day I edited a newspaper and had a great time, great year. Then was discharged. That was the end of my 3 wars.
World War II, War of Independence,
and Korea, yeah. And then they ran out of wars.
Then they ran out of wars. Wow, I didn't know that.
I missed Vietnam.
You missed Vietnam.
Yeah.
Wow. I want to get back to Machal for a moment. Did you?
I mean, how much are you actually? I mean, how much footage are you going to have? You're going to have a series that can run for the rest of my life.
When you were and when you got to did you guys ever have any leave time in Tel Aviv at the Machal Club? There was a Machal Club on Hayarkon Street, near the Park Hotel or the Palace.
Yeah, I remember the Park Hotel. Not much because I don't really remember much leave time because when I joined, we pretty much
hit the ground running.
We pretty much went into we started then Iraq and Sudan and then right down the Negev. I had some still from my parents, the Yekkes, the German, who had been active in the Zionists with my mother in Berlin, and I had some personal families that I knew, and I visited, and some others in the kibbutz, but I don't remember.
Okay. I think we're good.
Boy, oh boy, we really went far afield.
Far field. Is there anything about Machal that we didn't talk about? Is there anything that we missed?
Just in general, I like to say a couple of things.
Please.
One is that the American Jewish community did not cover itself with glory during the War of Independence, while especially South Africans, the British, the other ones, the local Jewish communities organized and stood behind them. In general, the American Jewish community showed not too much civil courage. They were afraid of double loyalty and what are those what are people going to say, and so on. So while there were individuals, Hank Greenfield and Greenspan, and other ones and so on, who smuggled, who lost their citizenship and so on, and there were individuals who then they're good at raising money, so of course we raised money.
You talked about Mickey Cohen.
Yeah, pardon me?
Lansky.
Yeah, pardon me? Yeah.
You talked about Mickey Cohen.
Mickey Cohen, Maya Lansky,
Maya
Lansky, and also the guys who Lansky who had the New York shipping. So he managed to see that the ships or sabotage some of the ships. So they were individuals, and they you knew the sympathy of the American Jewish community. But for instance, the South Africans had a real selective service system, draft system. The first day I was at Telotvinsky, which was the camp where the American next to a guy, and we go to bed, he takes it off, he has an artificial leg. He takes his leg off. He said, how in the hell did you ever get over here as a volunteer? He said, nobody asked, nobody inspected, and God forbid nobody had any psychological tests, which the other Anglo-Saxons did. Okay, you want to go, go. So that's paid for, and that's because they officially the American Jewish community kept a fairly low profile. In retrospect, there are two attitudes about Machal. For a while, the Machalniks were very hurt that the Israelis didn't seem to recognize, hey, we came over, we heroes, and did so. Three, you have the old story about the Air Force and the rest of it, which even goes back to World War II, that the same story was that the American Air Force said, well, you guys say we're doing something on the ground, but we're the ones who won the war. And you had a little bit of the same attitude, and as if the only volunteers had been Air Force guys, and that they saved the country and so on. And I'm sure they did very important work, but it was not just that the Air Force volunteer, American Air Force. Sometimes if you look at the movies, it was purely some American Air Force.
You can't win a war by the air.
Yeah, right. By the air, and if it hadn't been for what's the guy's name? Cast the Giant Shadow.
Mickey Marcus.
Mickey Marcus, yeah, Mickey Marcus. Who, by the way, the story there was that he got killed because he was drunk and couldn't remember the password. But I don't know whether that's the official version. But like if you saw Cast the Giant Shadow, Mickey Marcus tells Ben Gurion, this is what you have to do, and that's the Israelis won their own war. They had the casualties. The war, like everything else, the Air Force was very important. The Navy was important. The war was won on the ground. The casualties were on the ground. And I think that, so in one sense, the Hollywoodization of what the Machal did, of course. And the other way is sensed by many of the Machalniks that the Israelis wouldn't give credit at all. So egos plays in there,
sure.
but I think to pretty much all of us, this is probably the most important thing we've done in our lives. That they can't take away. That and I think that's one of my headlines of one of my articles in the American Army during World War II. Wherever you went in Europe, you had this little cartoon of a guy with a big nose looking over a wall and says, Kilroy was here. And in my articles, one of them said that, we may have done more, we have contributed less, more, this motive, that motive, but we were there. We were there as a part of history and as part of our lives, and that they can't take away. How many people are you interviewing?
Lots.
Huh? Yeah,
Lots.
a lot. What does a lot mean?
Well, in the last 2 months, I've interviewed about 40 people,
Really?
and back I did another 10 before. I think altogether maybe about 100. But that's just me. There's more people like me in this archive. There's a lot more people.
And what are you going to do with all that footage?
It's all being archived in Jerusalem. Yeah. We're going to fill out a release form now. I'm going to take some pictures. I want to take some photographs. And we're going to, but I think we're good. You feel that we, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Soon to be a major movie, huh?
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Tom,
Okay, good.
thank you so
Do you
much.
want to look at the...
Yeah, we're going to look at some pictures. I'm going to stop the camera now.
yeah.
And we're going to